Hello, everybody, and welcome or welcome back to the second shelf and to, I think, the second TBR video that I filmed this year. And most of the time I film two TBR videos in a year because, as you know, I don't really do TBRs, but I do one for Victober. So I filmed one for that. And today is the 1st of November. So Nonfiction November, and I'm going to film a TBR for that. Nonfiction November, you all know, is the event hosted by Olive from A Book Olive. I will leave a link to her announcement video down below. And basically, it is the month where we are encouraged to read nonfiction. If you never read nonfiction, you read one nonfiction book, you participating in Nonfiction November. But Olive also always comes up with 4 one-word prompts that you can use if you want to. And the prompts, I will leave a picture up here, is I'm so excited. Anyway, so the 4 prompts are fraud, web, capital, and display. I want to give them in the right order. That's why I had to look them up, because my memory is not what it used to be. Anyway, so those 4 words you can fill in any way you like. Olive always gives suggestions how you could fill them in. And for me, I almost always, I think, pick the books that I want to read for Nonfiction November before I know about the prompts. So my pleasure is always to make those books fit the prompts. With a little cheating now and then, or with a little force often, but I always make them fit somehow. So I have 4 books, one for each prompt. I will talk about those not that extensively because they are all 4 books that I acquired newly, and I talked about it in my last book haul and already explained what the book is about, but I will mention, of course, how I made them fit into the prompt. So the first prompt is fraud. And I picked a book that I've been meaning to read for some time, and that is Barbara Tuchman's The March of Folly, published in the 1980s. Yeah, 1984. And it is about, how can I... Tuchman illuminates 4 decisive turning points in history that illustrate the very heights of folly. So, political decisions by governments or almost governments that make no sense. So they are self-deception. And that's how I interpret fraud, like the Trojan War. This is the Trojan horse. Why on earth would you take this horse into your city? Are you dumb or what? I mean, that's probably one of the stupidest decisions that you can make if you are at war. Anyway, so she takes the Vietnam War, but also the Catholic Church and the Reformation, Martin Luther, how that worked, and talks about the folly, the march of folly. And I thought, fraud, deception, close enough. This is my book for the first prompt, fraud. The second prompt is web, and I decided to interpret it as a web of story and to choose a book about language. And that is also a new book, not also a new book, a newly bought book, and this is a new book by Jenny Nuttall, Mother Tongue, The Surprising History of Women's Words. So this looks at language and particularly at the development of words that were used for things or bodily functions that are particular to women. That's all I know about the book, but it sounded really interesting, and it was published earlier this year, I think in the spring of 2023, but maybe in the summer. So this is my book for the web of stories, language as our way of telling the stories. The second prompt, web. The third prompt, now I have to look it up again. As you can see, my memory is really bad. Capital. I chose to interpret capital as human capital and how we deal with human capital, or how badly, I should say, we often deal with human capital, and the differences between human capital, whether you are white or black or a minority, or that idea of human capital. And I picked a memoir, also a new release, Viral Justice by Ruha Benjamin, published in October. And this looks at, I showed you a picture of the author in my hall. This is her. She is a professor of African American studies at Princeton. And this is a combination of a memoir, and looking at the medical aspect. Viral Justice has something to do with COVID. But it's also her personal journey, how you could, like the subtitle says, how we grow the world we want. So how can we treat human capital better? That's my interpretation, because it had to fit the prompt capital. Book number 3. They're all pretty heavy, I can tell you, because a lot of them are new releases or big. And the last one is no, I can't. It's horrible. I can't even remember those 4 prompts. Display, of course. And I interpreted display as display of power. I wanted to read a book about power because I got this from Kim, middle of the book March, Emperor of Rome by Mary Beard, which came out in October, and this was a birthday gift from her. So Mary Beard, I read her earlier. She's a historian, a British historian, and she focuses on ancient Roman history. So her book about the Roman Empire, SPQR, I think it was the first book that I read, is fantastic. I read her very short book about women and power, because she's also an outspoken feminist. And this one looks at what it means to be an emperor. How does it work? How is power executed? How is power displayed? So this one I will read for the last prompt, display. Taking that away, man. I mean, 4 prompts. I should be able to remember those within, like, not forget one within a minute. Anyway, because this is the first part of the video, Nonfiction November, TBR. But I also, because I talked about those books already, I also wanted to recommend 4 books. If you want to participate, but you're not sure what you want to read, you maybe want to do the prompts. And I thought I'll give you 4 books, and as with the idea, one fits all. So in other words, all 4 books you can read for all 4 prompts, and you can read them. You can read one book to cover all 4 prompts, or if you need a book for a certain prompt, all 4 books that I will present here fit all 4 prompts. So the first one is a book that I've just finished, and I've talked about it quite extensively already, and that is Beth Macy's Dopesick, published in 2018. I think, something like that. 2018, yes, I was correct for once. And it is the book about the US opioid crisis. Very detailed, very well researched, going from the beginning in the 1990s up to 2017. And of course, the book talks about fraud, because the whole system of the how the Purdue Pharma presented the drug was fraudulent. It talks about capital, because there's a lot of money involved to buy and to sell these drugs. The legal drugs, a lot of money involved. So capital is certainly a big issue. It's a web of lies, what they present. And of course, it's display in terms of money on display, drugs on display. You can interpret display in various manners, but it fits all four prompts, and I can highly, highly recommend this book. The next one, I have to see which one is the next one on my list. Yes, and that is a little bit older, Susan Orlean, The Orchid Thief. I read this, I think last year or 2 years, maybe last year, recommendation from Heidi from my reading life, and I thought it was fantastic. So it is about an orchid thief and about the orchid trade, so to speak. I knew nothing about that, but it's absolutely a completely weird and fascinating world. So obviously, fraud, thievery. It's about a criminal action. There is a lot of money involved again, so capital is easy. Definitely a web of lie and deception, and display, because orchids are put on display for people to look at. So this one is a book if you want to have a narrative nonfiction about a theme that at least I think most people are not that familiar with. Really well told by Susan Orlean, very engaging, but also, it left me kind of flabbergasted, these people, especially the main character, so to speak, the orchid thief himself. But it is worthwhile reading, and it's, I think, the closest, that I have book of the 4 books to a novel. So if you are struggling with nonfiction, because of the facts and figures, and this one reads like a novel, almost, not entirely. I don't want to cause any deception here, but almost. So this is a good start if you want to dip your toe into nonfiction. Then the next one is, let me see when it was published, 2020. I picked one memoir because that's also a way to get into nonfiction, a personal story from one point of view, one author telling a certain story. And I picked one that I liked. I didn't love it. I don't want to fool you that it was the best memoir I've ever read, but it was good, and it fits definitely the prompt, and that is Uncanny Valley by Anna Wiener. It's about her time in Silicon Valley. So there's a lot of money involved, capital we have here. I interpret web, you can say web of lies, or, but also web because it's Silicon Valley. So the most literal modern interpretation of web is in here. She puts them on display by telling that story. And of course, a lot of it is fraudulent that happens there. The .com bubble, things like that. It's interesting, her point of view. She's not coming from computer science originally. So she has the outsider's view into that world. And it's interesting to read, for me at least, I thought it was interesting to read about Silicon Valley from that point of view. Again, it was not my favorite memoir, but it fits all the prompts. It's a good, engaging, entertaining read. And the memoir is also, like I said, always a good start if you want to get into nonfiction. So Uncanny Valley by Anna Wiener. By the way, Uncanny Valley is about is a scientific thing when you have non-human, like dolls or robots, and they look almost like humans but not quite, and they make you icky because it's not quite. That's what science calls Uncanny Valley, the dip. Something is almost human and then it's almost too human, and it makes you, your skin crawl. That's the Uncanny Valley. Anyway, in case you were interested. And the last one is a book that I read recently with Heidi Kate Moore, The Radium Girls, published a couple of years back, 2016. And this is the book, is a book about the First World, in the time of the First World War, and young American women flocked to work in factories painting clocks, watches, and military dials with a special luminous substance made from radium. And nobody told them that this was dangerous, even though people knew, especially factory owners knew. So they had to lick the brush to make it more pointy, dip it in the radium, lick it again. I mean, I'm getting sick just by thinking of it. And a lot of these women, of course, got very sick. Cancer, horrible deaths or illnesses. And this is the story of how these women tried to get justice, to get the company to pay and to acknowledge that there was something wrong. It's not an enjoyable story, but it is, because I was really angry most of the time when I read the book, but it's very well told, and it has kind of a happy end, more or less, and a lot of the safety regulations for in the workplace come from these cases. And of course, there's a lot of money involved, a lot of deceptions or fraud, because they didn't tell the girls. There's also money involved, capital, in terms of that they ask for damages. Display, because it's about watches, and the display of the how do you call that, the clock, the dial of the clock, and it's a web of deception and lies. So again, this fits all 4 prompts. So this is my own TBR, and 4 recommendation, 1 fits all. I hope you will participate in Nonfiction November. Let me know if you do. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching. As always, very much looking forward to your comments, and I'll talk to you all soon in the next one.